for the affair in Wisconsin. I swallowed hard against my nerves and chewed on my lip a little as we walked up past the line of cars parked in the Porter's circular drive. I'd felt tingly all day now, and I'd have to face Blake again, this time quite publicly, at his birthday party. The front door was open. Blake was welcoming another couple to the party. I saw him, saw his happy smile, and breathed a sigh of relief. It was like it always had been, friendly, comfortable. He was a gracious host. "Glenn, Aaliyah," he said, seeming to savor my name in his mouth. "It's good to see you." "Yes, Blake, it's been forever," I laughed. It had been all of 18 hours. He pulled me in for a hug. "You have no idea," he said huskily in my ear. With his words, the world closed in around me, and suddenly I felt like the only person in the room. My body tingled anew. He shook Glenn's hand. "There's beer on the back porch, wine on the counter," and he cast a glance over his shoulder. "In the fridge if you want that white crap Cammy drinks. Make yourself at home." He smiled at me and shed the good host veneer for a moment. He really smiled. There were so many people there. The house was packed and more people were spilling out onto the back deck. "I'm glad you came." "Wouldn't have missed it, birthday boy." I gave him a playful swat on the ass as I walked past him. I hung my coat on their rack and headed for the spread. Once I had a decent plate full of chips, salsa, and fruit, I headed to the kitchen to get a glass of red. I mingled a little. I sought out people I knew should be there, and found a few of them. Eric and I exchanged hellos, and then Donna winked and indicated I should follow her out to the garage. She got me stoned, and I zoned out with her for a good long time. "How you doing, honey?" she asked after I'd passed the pipe back to her the third or fourth time. "Great," I said enthusiastically. It was as close as I could come to telling her that I was spending every spare moment dreaming about her brother. "Glenn and I are actually hopefully going to see a fertility doctor soon," I confided in her. She was one of the few who knew how badly I wanted a baby. All the books I'd read, all the things I'd tried. I mean, we'd had discussions about cervical mucus. We've been friends a long time. "Well, it's about time." "I know, you know I get scared." It was an understatement. I don't do doctors, not well. Not on my own, not since my father died. "Yes, honey, I know." She did, too. "How's the depression treating you these days?" It had been Donna several years back who had originally marched me to the doctors to get antidepressant meds in the first place. Honestly, I'd most likely have killed myself by now without her intervention. Depression is the most subtle poison. It creeps up on you day by day, robbing you of any kind of enjoyment until all you can think about is how you mean nothing, and everyone would be better off without you around. Everything would just be easier. Life becomes the perpetual gray of a 9-month-long Seattle winter. I knew if I went off the meds for too long, I'd start slipping. I'd hardwired one red flag in my brain. When that flag triggered, I knew I had to get back on the meds. I'm not sure why I ever stopped taking them, actually, except they're expensive. And there's something about depression, even though I knew it was a chemical imbalance. Because it's centered in the mind, I somehow thought I should be able to just overcome it. Mind over matter. I mean, I'm smart. I am an above average bear, but somehow I can't handle it forever. Eventually I have to go back on the meds. "Your brother seems happy." "Of course he does, it's his birthday." "Donna is big on birthdays." She shrugged. "He's as happy as he's gonna be." "What does that mean?" I laughed. "Oh, you know, that shrew." Donna was not exactly fond of Blake's wife. "I really need to slip her some pop brownies one of these days." I laughed. It was true. Cammy was a force to be reckoned with. "You really should," I said. "She could do with a good dose of chill." "You know it. That bitch has control issues rammed so far up her ass she's trying to make diamonds out of shit." Donna's blue eyes twinkled. "Speaking of, we should get out of here before Her Majesty finds us smoking pot in her garage." Cammy was on one of her abstinence kicks, and if Cammy didn't partake, you'd better not dare partake around her. She'd been on this kick for a few months now. You know, she actually chewed me out at Carol's baby shower because she thought I was stoned. She did not. Donna's face reflected her mock astonishment. She'd been on the other end of that lash, too. She did, in front of other people I didn't know. She stood up and pointed her finger at me and said, loudly might I add, "Are you stoned, Aaliyah Clayton? You look stoned." Donna, seriously, she sounded like a priest in a pulpit, screeching about damnation. Who comes to a baby shower stoned? Can't get through the day without it? What are you, an addict? She did not. She did. What did you do? I just looked at her. I was like, Cammie, I'm not stoned. I mean, seriously, I wasn't. Later, I sat on a bench in the middle of their huge grassy backyard. I had no idea where Glenn was. I didn't really care. I just wanted some time to stare at the stars. I could feel the initial claws of PMS rip into my abdomen. Another baby I wouldn't have. Clumps of people stood all around me. I overheard parents talking to each other about how hard it was to find a good babysitter these days and how expensive they were. Jesus Christ, somebody please give me the hassle of having to find a good, expensive babysitter. A cigarette later, Blake stepped out onto their expansive back porch. Surprised at how happy I was to see him, I found myself involuntarily smiling. There were 40 people in the yard, easy. He looked over directly at me, like he knew exactly where I was sitting already. He smiled back at me and lit me on fire. I looked around. No one saw us, right? Smiling happy. I was being silly, I told myself. A stupid kind of paranoid. What would they see? Smiley, happy people? People at a party? Blake's attention made me feel naked was all. I felt my cheeks grow hot. I was actually blushing. Slowly, he snaked his way through the crowd, stopping to say a few words here and there, making sure everyone was taken care of. People had what they needed, they liked the music, and of course, to accept their birthday wishes. I knew this because I had been to about 8 of Blake's birthday parties and countless other parties he and Cammie had thrown. Blake charmed everyone he met. Person by person, he made his way to where I sat, alone on a bench in the middle of their crowded yard, surrounded by his friends, her friends, our friends. Well, if it isn't Miss Aaliyah, he said, putting one booted foot on the bench next to me. He leaned forward and rested his forearms on his knees so his face was closer to mine. I found myself breathing slightly faster, shallower. I felt like every part of my being wanted to draw nearer to him. I was magnetized. Happy birthday, Mr. Porter, I managed and swallowed. Enjoying yourself so far? His whole tone of voice shifted. I am. I was. And then I saw you sitting here all alone and so pretty, and I wish all these silly people were gone and I had y'all to myself. A bolt of panic ran through me. Blake, hush. Someone could overhear. What? I'm just saying someone as gorgeous as yourself shouldn't be sitting alone on a bench. Where is your husband, anyway? Good question, I said. Could be anywhere, probably with Johnny. Johnny was Donna's husband and Glenn's best friend, as well as one of our poker buddies. We had a tight circle. I gestured vaguely at the house. Well, I suppose you'll have to endure my company on your own then. He reached for my hand. Take a walk with me, pretty lady? I could tell he'd knocked back more than a few already. His Texas drawl was coming on thicker with every sentence. He was adorable. His fingers softly brushed the palm of my hand. His touch set my whole body vibrating like a harp string, imperceptible to the eye, but resonant. I let him help me up, but then withdrew my hand from his. I didn't trust myself, not with all these people. Cammie was here somewhere too, though I managed to mostly avoid her other than a brief greeting. Don't be stupid, Blake, I said quietly, walking ahead. I don't know what you think you're doing, but I can't play this game with you. I'm not doing anything, he said, catching up to me. Just going to refill. I stumbled in the dark, and he dropped his beer to catch me before I pitched completely forward. His arms kept me from falling, and he lifted me back upright like I weighed no more than a dress. Careful now, he said. You have to watch out for those mole holes. He briefly caressed my lower back as he set me down. His arm fell away, and I shuddered from the absence of his touch. Thanks. I swallowed to clear the huskiness from my throat. You all right? Everything all right? Blake asked. I nodded. Sorry about that. I thought I'd fill all those suckers in, he said. He retrieved the rest of his foaming beer, took a look at it, and set the bottle aside on the table. As I was saying, I'm just looking for some company while I get me new beer. We continued our way through the thick crowd. We got to the coolers, and Blake grabbed a long neck for himself. I shook my head no when he asked with a raised eyebrow and a nod at the cooler if I wanted one. I did wonder where I'd left my wine. Reminds me of a story, actually, Blake said. My daddy, when we were living out in some big property division in the hill country, that's Texas, of course, we were all kids, mind you, when this happened. The crowd started to gather around Blake. He did that, naturally, collected people to him. He'd had the Met story. I'd seen it happen hundreds of times. Anyway, my daddy had an armadillo problem. He said it, armadillo. I mean, he had a problem. They were tearing up holes left and right, digging all over his front yard garden. And if you know my daddy, you know he is mighty proud of his garden. I happened to know Rex Porter, and it was true. He was mighty proud of his garden. So what did he do? I prompted. About the dillers, he did what every God-fearing Texan would do. He prayed on it. Then he went to bed. He set his alarm first, of course, and woke up when it went off at 2:30 in the morning. Right when he had it set for, he had a plan for those critters. He crept out onto the front porch and threw on the floodlights. Blake's arm shot out from his body to illustrate the point. He almost lost his beer again. It slashed at the rim, but he steadied it. Them dillers were everywhere. He smiled at me. I felt my body turn magnetic again, everything under my skin trying to pull me toward him. I leaned in closer. Way my daddy tells it, there were so many dillers that all you could see was dillers. There was dillers popping up out of holes, coming in from the neighbors' yards, and all these dillers were giving birth to baby dillers right there as he watched. So you know there were a whole lot of them. I think 10 is a safe assumption. We laughed, and so did the others listening. I felt myself looking at him as he continued, wishing I were 11 years younger and that this was an entirely different night. So, as he's seeing bazillions of these damn things in the yard, he does the sensible thing, he continued, and he grabs up his shotgun and starts firing at those suckers as fast as he can keep his gun loaded. I realized I'd always seen Blake socially, at a party, at a game. I'd almost never spoken to him alone. In fact, I couldn't think of a single time we'd been alone together for longer than the time it took to smoke a cigarette. Now, keep in mind, my daddy is living in a neighborhood subdivision. His across the street neighbor, I kid you not, his name was Earl, comes out and says, "Rex, what the hell are you doing?" My daddy says, "I'm shooting dillers, Earl, get your shotgun." Now, and here's the difference between Washington and Texas. Blake spread his hands out in front of him and waited, drawing out the suspense before going on. That's exactly what happened. Earl didn't get on the phone and call animal control or the police. He got a shotgun, and he and my daddy spent the wee hours of that morning shooting dillers and ratchet John. Blake drew one hand back to an imaginary trigger and squinted down the eye of his imaginary barrel and started taking shots at the gathered crowd, his imagined dillers. "Kablam!" he said. "Kablam, kablam, kablam!" His intended victims in the audience clutched at their chest and mock fell or stumbled back as he pointed at them. "But that's it," he continued. "None of this overzealous gun control, no excessive animal control. I mean, that's the difference right there. Texans do for themselves." I looked at him with new eyes. I thought, they sure do. Thank you.